Hey, what's up everybody? This is Gianella, and today in this video we're gonna talk about chemistry. So first we need to understand what's chemistry about. So we're gonna start defining what's chemistry, about what Dmitry Mendeleev says. So chemistry is concerned with the study of the homogeneous substances or materials of which all the objects of the universe are made up, with transformation of these substances into each other, and with the phenomena which accompany such transformation. That's what Dmitry Mendeleev says. But this is such a complicated definition, and it's so complicated also to understand it. So we're gonna be talking about chemistry with a simple definition, that is the organized study of the composition and interactions of substances or matter. So during this whole video, we're gonna be talking about two important things: the chemical reactions and about chemical equations, and what's the difference between those and how they are also related. So let's start with this. The study of chemical reactions is the most important aspect of studying chemistry, and it also helps us to understand how gas physical creation works out. So we're gonna start defining what's a chemical reaction. A chemical reaction is the change resulting from a collision between atoms or molecules, and it has two parts, the chemical reaction. The chemical reaction has the products and the reactants. So the reactants are the original substance you're working with, and when you mix two or more substances, that will be all of the reactants, you will get the products. That's the new substance you get after. So as I was also saying, we're also going to talk about chemical equations. So a chemical equation is the expression that uses chemical symbols to represent a chemical reaction. So there's difference between those, but they're quite related. But since in this video the main subject will be the balance of chemical equations, we're just gonna talk about one part of the chemical equation, that is the stoichiometric coefficients. They're also only known as coefficients, so you don't complicate your tongue because it's like a tongue twister. So the stoichiometric coefficients, or just coefficients, are the big numbers that are before the substance in both sides. They also could be on the reactants or also could be on the products, but we're gonna give some examples later on. But before getting into the balancing of the equations, I want you to know a real important law, that is the law of conservation of mass. It basically says that the mass you get into an equation when they react, you should have the same amount of mass because it wouldn't disappear. And this is related with the chemical equations and the balancing, because when you are trying to balance an equation, you should have the same amount of atoms or molecules on the right side and in the left side. So you should pay attention to that. So I'm just gonna mention three methods you could use to balance equations. Those are the trial and error, that is the most common and the simple one, that maybe is the one I go and make some examples for you. You also have the redox method, which is one of my favorite ones because it's really complex, but it also, you won't have an error in that, not like on the trial, that you should be really careful with. And you also have the algebraic one, or the mathematic one, that you use some symbols to represent those, and you use some mathematical algebraic procedures so you could get the answer on. But I will basically focus on the trials and errors one. So let's go and check some examples of balancing chemical equations so you can understand what I was talking about. So here's our example about balancing a chemical equation. So first, I want you to pay attention to the parts or the elements of the equation. So here you have a coefficient that I was talking you about. In this case, it's an 1. Even though you don't write it down, and you have to follow some rules for that. So there are three that are the main important. You can only modify the coefficients, not the subscripts. The subscripts are the small numbers and the coefficients are the big ones. 2. For balancing equation, you have to take in consideration the law of conservation of mass. You should have the same amount on both sides. I will explain that later on. And 3. After each change, check again each element. So I will give you 3 basic steps to balance a chemical equation. First, you have to write down the number of atoms per element. in this case we have 2 hydrogens on the reactants and 2 oxygens. And on the products we have 2 hydrogens and only 1 oxygen because it doesn't have any subscript on this side. So for that you have to change the coefficients to have the same amount on both sides. As I was saying, of the law of conservation math, you have to have the same amount of the reactants and the same amount of the products. So you have to change the coefficients. So here in this case I put a 2 that will affect the oxygen. So now I have 4 hydrogens because 2 by 2 is 4 and 2 by 1 is 2. So we have 2 oxygens on each side, but now you have to check again because as you can see we have 4 hydrogens on our products and 2 hydrogens on our reactants. So we go and check again, and for balancing and have the same amount of both sides, I have to add a coefficient here that will be a 2. So 2 by 2 is 4. We have 2 oxygens and have 2 by 2 is 4 and 2 by 1 is 2. So we have 4 hydrogens on each side and 2 oxygens on each side. So that's how you balance chemical equations. And that's it for this video. Thank you so much for watching until this point. Give me a like if you really like it and subscribe to my YouTube channel.